So you're all here. So Nate and I are going to be talking a bit about portfolios and work samples, but really the stars of the show are Louise and Martin. So we are recording this. We're going to do our best to have it available online for those who aren't able to come in person. So we're going to talk for about 15 minutes, maybe 10, if we're good. And then 10 or 15 minutes for Martin and Louise, and then we're going to do some questions and answers. So first to start, to kind of introduce ourselves, I am Heather Carpenter-Oliveira, and I am a co-op coordinator in mechanical and industrial engineering. Go ahead.
I'm Nathan Ziegler, same thing, mechanical and industrial engineering. And while we are here, we can also introduce Sharon Britton, who's in the back left corner, and Cheryl Aruda. They also work in the mechanical and industrial engineering department. So good faces to know.
So we're just going to cover briefly why a portfolio. So why are we even doing this? Why is all this talk about portfolios? Talking about what's the difference between a portfolio and a work sample, because I think you've probably all heard both of those terms. Martin and Louise are going to show their portfolios, one of which is paper-based and one of which is web-based. And then we're going to have that question and answer section that I talked about.
All right, so you are all here for a reason. Can someone tell me why you're here? I know why you're here, because I asked you to present. Oh, I have to stand up right here. You are grinning in a nice smirk.
I'm just here because I need to figure out how to make a portfolio and why I need a portfolio. So.
Okay. So all right. Anyone else have a more specific reason why they're here? Anyone walk away from co-op with samples of work, maybe some CAD drawings, some other things, and now you're like, what do I do with these things next? Yeah. So really, the whole idea of a portfolio is taking, really, at this point, your samples of work while you were on co-op. It also could be while you were in classes. It could be academics. It could be extracurriculars. It could be hobbies. Louise is going to show us some of that. And putting it together into a nice format that you can show an employer. So I like to think about a resume as a document that pulls all of your experiences together and shows what you've done, highlights your accomplishments, your results. And then a portfolio takes everything that you've done and shows what you can do. So it's a nice description. It shows results. It shows physical things that you have actually worked on. An employer can be like, wow, this is amazing. I can take this and go from here with this person. A big thing about this session that we do want to stress is that it does take time to put some of this together. And so we're going to be talking about putting together a full engineering portfolio versus collecting some samples of work. And regardless if you put together a portfolio, if you put together samples of work, poorly formatted, poorly selected samples can hurt you more than they're going to help you. And so I think Louise does a good job, and Martin, you do a good job of kind of creating a well-rounded individual as an engineer versus a single expertise and not really showcasing a variety of things. Is anyone in here going to be enrolled in any IE 3000 for the fall? Okay, so you will be taking that, okay, you're presenting though. You will be going into a lot more detail about putting together an engineering portfolio. The idea of this session is really just getting you off the ground, and so getting you ready for the fall application round, that you will have things put together. And then I think that's really all I wanted to say in terms of why it's showing you what you can do, and then you do need to take time to put something that's solid and well thought out.
So from our perspective, we hear from employers all the time, or we only want candidates that have samples of work, or we want candidates who can show us their portfolio. And so last summer, I went to New York, and I was trying to get some more jobs for people who want to work in New York. And I met with his principal, I guess is his title, of Pensa. And his name's Marco. And so I sat down with Marco, and I said, you require a portfolio. What are you looking for in a portfolio? And so the biggest thing that he said, and I wrote it down as a quote so that I could tell people, and I think it goes along with what Nate just said, is he wants your portfolio to demonstrate your curiosity, your passion, maybe some leadership, and your initiative. So just slapping a CAD drawing on isn't going to just do that, right? That's a good way to show a sample of a piece of work that you know how to do or a skill you know how to do, but it doesn't demonstrate those things that he wants you to highlight. So he wants to know, are you a real engineer? Are you curious about things? Do you wonder about things? What do you do for fun in your spare time? What are you doing for clubs or other things like that? How are you taking a project and thinking about how to bring it to the next level or how to solve a problem? So those are the things that he wants to see demonstrated, and that's a small product development firm, and I think that's where you're going to see the bulk of required, really solid portfolios. So what's the difference between a portfolio and a sample of work? So a portfolio is well structured. So you're going to see Martin and Louise have really well done portfolios. They're structured, it's easy to follow. You can understand what the project was, how they worked on it, how they thought about it. It's going to be something that stands alone. So this is the trickiest part. So if you're working on a portfolio and you say, well, I'm going to explain it to the person when they get there, that's not going to help you with your application materials. So a lot of companies now are asking you to submit a portfolio link on your resume along with your resume. So you may or may not get your chance to explain it when you're with that person in an interview. This is your chance to get the interview. So you're looking at me like, how is it supposed to stand alone? What are you talking about, Heather? Good question. So the way to do that is, if you remember back to 2000, you took 2000 and we talked about behavioral interviews, we talked about the STAR method. Does everyone remember the STAR method? No, nobody does. So if you remember, you would questions like, tell me about a time you, or give me an example of when, blank, right? Those are behavioral interview questions. And the way we talked about answering them is situation, task, action, result. That's the STAR method. So when you're doing your portfolio, you're going to be thinking similarly to the STAR method, but I've kind of shortened it to PAR. Or you can say CAR, if you really like cars, maybe that's easier for you to remember. And PAR is like problem or process, action, and result. So if you're looking at something that you've created, what's something somebody does for fun? I'm trying not to pick on you, Eric, because I know you. What do people do for fun? None of you do anything fun. You're all really boring.
Play sports.
Play sports. Okay, so say you're playing a sport, and you find that you played hockey, and you're like, you know what, I could really make my hockey stick better. And so you think about, how could I make my hockey stick better? And you decide to design a new end to the hockey stick. I don't know what that thing's called. Part that hits the puck, right? And so you might go into SolidWorks and model this new end to your hockey stick, right? And then you try it out. You put it on the stick, it doesn't work. It's horrible, it's the worst thing. So you realize, okay, it needs to be wider, it needs to be thinner, I need a different material, right? This is the design process. So you're gonna document this process. You're gonna wanna show the person, how did you think about it? How did you approach it? What made you decide that this wasn't the right model or the right material or whatever it was? And then after you've done that, you're going to show what was your second design iteration. And if that worked, tell me why. What was the result? How did it work? Okay? So that's the PAR, the process, the problem, process, action, result. So if you're doing something for fun or you're doing something for work, you can describe your work samples in that way. So that's kind of how the portfolio differs from a sample of work, where the sample of work is going to just be the drawing. And you're going to bring that drawing with you to an interview, and you're going to be able to talk about the drawing, but it's not going to be a standalone, something that you can just send out and it describes itself for you. Okay? So the most important part of the portfolio is that it gives you this 360 view of who you are, a well-rounded look. So who are you personally? Who are you professionally? What skills do you have? So one other thing that Marco told me when I was talking to him was that you could use the About Me section of your portfolio, whether it's paper-based or web-based, to be a sort of a cover letter, to kind of talk about who you are. Why are you an engineer? What are you passionate about? Where do you have skills? And so those are all things that portfolio should demonstrate for you. So you can see it's a lot. And that's why it takes a long time to invest, in creating it. And if you want a good one, which is what you should strive for, because if you just throw together a kind of crappy one, then that's what the employer is going to think. It's going to take some time to really flesh it out. Other sections that I've seen that have been pretty successful are, lessons learned. So if you built that piece to your hockey stick and it's terrible, what did you learn from that process? Why did you have to change it? What was different? And then also skills developed. So during that process, you learned how to model it in SolidWorks. You learned how to maybe, went to the lab and you used the Instron and beat it up. So you learned how to test it and use the Instron. So what are the skills that you developed from that sample of work, from that within the portfolio? Okay. So the flip side, the sample of work is less formal. You're going to bring it with you to an interview. It's going to maybe just have a couple of concise descriptions if you decide to link it to a resume. It's not necessarily going to follow that fleshed out PAR example. And it's only one-dimensional. It's only going to show maybe one aspect of who you are as an engineer, not necessarily give that full view. Okay? Questions about that specifically before we dive deeper? That was a lot of information. All right, so Louise and Martin are going to show you.
Can I say one
Yeah.
thing? I don't want us to paint this picture that you have to do a portfolio and that a portfolio is necessarily better than samples of work. You need to think about what companies you're applying for and what you have. If you're coming from a job where you only were able to collect 1 to 2 samples of work and you weren't necessarily involved in activities where you were able to pull things from Baja and certain things, that is a great opportunity for just pulling together a few samples of work and bringing that to an employer. A kind of a skeleton portfolio will look not the best. It's kind of like when we look at a resume and someone shows up with 1.5 margins and 14 sized font, and you just you have no clue what's on that page, but you're taking a gut feeling that there's not much. And so if you're putting together a skimpy skeleton portfolio, it might be just to put things together in those few samples of work. So there are advantages to both. And we do have some employers who just say, hey, we just want some samples of work. We just want to see what they've done so we can see what they're going to be able to do with us.
And also the portfolio is used for the application process primarily. You're going to use the samples of work in the interview. And so if it's fleshed out within the portfolio, great. You can use it during the interview. But if it's not fleshed out, it's fine. You still bring a sample of work. I think you're all engineers. You like to get your hands on stuff. You like to see things, right? That's the same with the people who are interviewing you. So if you're able to bring a sample of work, that's a great thing, and you're going to stand out far above someone who brings nothing to an interview. Okay?
Yep. So last thing before we turn it over to our presenters, format. So we keep using this term paper-based, and I think it should be maybe in quotations. So I guess I'll start here. So when you're putting together paper-based, whether or not it's a portfolio, whether or not you put it together in just a few samples of work, you're going to use PowerPoint, maybe Word, Publisher. If you're fancy, you can use InDesign and make it look great. That's something that's not expected. Those are they come through every once in a while, and we're like, wow, that's really impressive. A lot of times engineers are more concerned about the content and what you're showing them than what the aesthetics are. The big thing though is when you make a paper-based is that always convert it to a PDF, and then if you are at a point where you maybe have added a description to your samples of work, where you have a full portfolio put together, you can actually host that file on Dropbox, on Google Drive, and then put that link directly on your resume. The one thing that we do say is try to use Bitly or TinyURL, or I know Dropbox and Google both have some shortening options. The last thing you want is this mile-long URL at the header or the footer of your resume. So shortening it up. The nice thing about a paper-based is that it's already formatted and it's easily brought to an interview. Sample of work or portfolio. So we do have some companies that when you walk in, they're like no devices that have a camera, no devices that connect to the internet, and you're sometimes locking things away. That is extreme end. But if you're showing up with a paper printout of something, you can say this is what I have. Whereas if you choose to do web-based, you do need to be thinking, if you want to talk about those samples of work, talk about your portfolio during an interview, how are you going to display that content? We've had students bring laptops. We've had students who have the nice laptops that fold around. They brought iPads, just regular tablets, but that is something, or you can print, but just how is that going to print? And then another thing about paper-based is it's also good for sensitive information. So one thing that you should be talking, I hope you talked to all your employers about, is how you're going to present this information. So we had one employer, probably a few years, a year and a half ago now, who was A-okay with a traditional paper-based portfolio. And then the student put together this beautiful website, sent it to his employer, and the employer was like, what do you mean this is on the internet? This is not to be on the internet, this is supposed to be paper-based, and there was just some miscommunication there. If there are some concerns about who will see the information, how it's distributed, you might want to go with that paper-based format. And then for web-based, it's dynamic. You can change it, you can update it, you can add content, remove content, you can put videos there, you can put pictures that can enlarge. So it's really nice, and we listed a few websites here. I know, which one are you using? Portfolio Box. So Luis used Portfolio Box. We see a lot of people using Weebly and Wix.
Wix, okay.
Martin used Wix. He's going to show you. He does have a web-based one. One thing that we really want you to avoid is Celio. So it's kind of like professional Pinterest almost. And it's not, so you get this like grid of these little pictures, and it's not easy to navigate in any way. It's not appealing. So leave your Pinteresting to your personal life. Leave that out of your professional life. And then I think that's really all I wanted to say. What's that? Oh, yes. So I went on an employer visit, and at the end I said, what feedback do you have? One last thing. And the last thing that he gave me was that we aren't having any students showing up with physical samples. If they worked on something small, if they printed something, if they're excited about it, bring it with them during an interview. You can easily miss a piece of paper sitting in front of you unless you're actively saying, look at my portfolio. You could get to the end of the interview and say, oh, well, no one looked at this. Whereas if it's something you physically brought, A, it's hard to miss, and 2, it's going to make you stand out. So this picture, this was an academic project. It was from the circuits class, and a student really, really liked it, and he brought it in a shoebox. It had fallen apart halfway through, but it was kind of neat. He got to put it back together while he was sitting with them, and they ate it up and ended up giving him an offer. So nothing crazy. Don't try to lug in something large. But don't forget that things can be physical when you bring to them. Okay.
All right, so we're going to get to the stars of the show. So we asked Martin and Louise to talk about their 2 portfolios, and I'm going to have Martin start us off with the paper-based, and you can talk about your electronic one too. And we have these beautiful pictures from their LinkedIn that we stole off the internet. So Martin's first co-op was at Senior Aerospace Middle Bellows, second at Digital Lumens, third was at Basis, which is an Intel company out in California. So they'll be able to talk to you about how they use these to search internet while they were international. And do you want to start with this page? All right.
So going back to what Nate said, it's really important to clear everything you're taking from your co-op with your supervisor or someone in HR that it's okay to be showing it online. So when I went and cleared all my samples of work and stuff I was taking from my second co-op at Digital Lumens, my boss didn't like some of the things being online, but he suggested making a web-based portfolio as kind of just an intro to include on my resume. So under each of these pages, I just have like a brief description of the topic, what I did, and then a lot of the real detail for the project is in my portfolio. And that was important to do because if you Google my name, this picture comes up. So it's not a big deal because that was cleared, but if it's something else that is more sensitive, someone could be Googling your name and find much more important information online. So add to the portfolio.
Mine's backwards.
Okay. So a little bit about myself. I'm a senior mechanical engineering student here. Last fall, I was studying abroad at UCD in Dublin. So for my co-op search, I created a web-based portfolio as well as a online paper-based portfolio as a presentation that I would then send to an employer before my interview to really show some of the detail of my work that I didn't want to be publicly available. So one of the first things I worked on at Digital Lumens was the DDWPL, and it's a plug to cover a connector in light fixtures when they're directly wired. So my goal for the project was to seal the connecting port to match the fixture's IP52 rating, and these were some of my responsibilities while working on the project. So in my portfolio, I start off each project or each big topic kind of the same way. I was like, what my goal for the project was, and then what things I did to kind of give an overview of the project. And then here I jump into a lot of like the design revisions I went through. So this is the first version of the cap, really basic, didn't work, which is not a big deal. The important thing to show is what didn't work, what you learned from it. So as I was going through, I noticed that because of the shape of the mating connector, I had to add some additional geometry like the dip here for it to seal a lot better. And then just going through, these are all of my design iterations, and then going down, same thing on the bottom side of the cap. So started off with just simple snap features, also didn't work very well. Going through, I ended up deciding to snap into the connector because it was the simplest thing. So the important thing to show here is you're trying out what you're actually working on. It's not just, you're not just designing in a vacuum. Another example, that's the foam, that it was really a pain to put in, it's hard to align. And that's something I gathered from my own experience of sitting there and gluing them in. So eventually added a little cutout that made it a lot easier to line up. And then again, to show a lot of the process, this is just an overview of some of the testing I did. Nothing in a lot of great detail, but just covering everything I did. Like this was going on throughout the process. And then once my design was done, I had to match or meet some other regulatory requirements, which I'm showing here, like the removal force testing and the impact testing. The next thing I worked on was the goal of the project was to make a fuse non-user replaceable. So the interesting thing about this project was we brainstormed a lot of different solutions to what would work. Listed some of them here, like gluing it in, even soldering it in, which maybe doesn't seem like the best idea, but we tried to consider everything. And then my job was to go through all of these different options and decide what the best one was. So eventually, after going through some of the gluing potting compounds and finding out that a warning sticker wasn't enough, we settled on making a molded plastic cap to hold the fuse in place. So again, showing some of my design revisions here, from snapping to the side to then to the fuse, and then my final design there at the bottom. And here I'm including just a picture of like where it's being wired into. So like again, throughout the process here, I was constantly assembling, disassembling with and without gloves to be sure that when someone's installing this in the field, it's actually possible to do. And my last thing from Digital Lumens was to create a housing for a surge suppression module. And this project really evolved over the last couple months of my co-op. It started off as we want one thing to stick in the light fixtures, and it's going to protect it from surge events that the building's own surge suppression systems don't. So again, laying out the project the same way with the requirements and my responsibilities on this one. So here I'm showing off some of the initial concepts I had, like a small heat shrink design, and then plastic designs once we determined that the heat shrink concept wasn't good enough for our needs. Again, some more samples here. So this is just like a plastic cap that I'm 3D printing and then covering in heat shrink. We eliminated this because the heat shrink tubing was actually too expensive to use, which is kind of interesting on my part that I got to prove that a plastic concept would be better, because using some estimates from previous projects, we found out that it would actually cost less to use a plastic part than buying lengths of heat shrink tubing for this project. And then here I'm just showing some more of my revisions going through one of the light fixtures from initial kind of blocky concept, if you can see it, it looks a little washed out, all the way down to my final design. And then here's some more detail on it with the PCA inside of it, and some other features I've added, like for strain relief there, and details like considering things for DFM to make sure we could actually make the part. and I'll go through this quickly. Same thing for the other light fixture, different shapes. So the housing had to be its own design. Again, showing some of the design iterations, and then the same search module inside of this one. And then some more just final glamour shots of it actually being assembled in the fixture.
Do you want to go to like one of your personal projects?
Am I going long?
No, just to show like, because you have a lot of cool stuff.
Okay. All right, we'll skip that. So one thing I work on in my free time is a 3D printer. So I bought one about 2 years ago online out of a kit. Worked okay, printed a bunch of things, but I decided it wasn't fast enough for me and it really didn't print that well, so I wanted to build my own. This is still kind of an ongoing thing. This is a CAD screenshot of what it would look like if I was ever done. So again, laying out the project the same way. My first concept that I tried didn't really work. Design revisions for how it was going to work. More design revisions as I'm building these, testing them, and finding out that like, oh, this one wobbles, it doesn't align very well. Now it's going to give me much more stability and also a bigger build area, down to my final design, which I have now on the printer. And this is just some of their, like a detailed part and the revisions I'm going through from the original one all the way down to my final design. More part details, even more part details. I know this is really exciting. And so one thing I want to highlight here is for the z-axis of my printer, or what's moving up and down, I started out here and never really built this design. I started out by doing research, finding out some design guidelines for building something like this, which led me to my second one, which I built and then didn't work. And getting even more feedback, and doing some research, I got to this, which now works. So it's nice to show that your first idea might not always be the best. It doesn't have to work, and that you're just iterating through the process to get to your final goal. You don't have to get there on your first step. And then this is just showing like the progression of the printer overall, from the top corner down to the actual printer. And then back to the sample support. Had I been in the States for this interview process, this is probably two parts I would have brought in. The one on the left here is printed on my first printer, and you can kind of see some of the waviness and the inconsistencies in the layers. And then this is off of my newer printer, much better layer alignment, and it's much more consistent. So that's nice to show, like bring in these two parts and have them actually be able to see the improvement of like what you're doing and then the byproduct of it. And that's it.
So a couple of things I just want to ask you about / point out. So when you were studying abroad and you had to have interviews, how did you bring up the fact you had this portfolio?
So on my resume, I list a link to my web-based portfolio showing some of the things I've worked on, all my experience. And let's say Intel would contact me that they want to set up an interview. I would schedule the interview, but also mention I have a more detailed paper-based portfolio that I would then send over either in a Google Drive link or as an attachment, depending on its size.
And so one thing I want to highlight is that the reason I asked Martin to kind of skip to the 3D printing stuff, because that's like what he does for fun. And so I think that's cool. And I think a lot of you have those kinds of projects going on, and that a lot of times, I know when I meet with students, I'll say, well, what do you do for fun? And they're like, I don't know. And then it comes out that you are building your own 3D printer. So those things are important for your job search. So if you're not documenting them, document them. If you don't do it for fun and you're doing it in class, then document it, because those are still projects that are showing your skills. So start to kind of change your frame of reference when you're in classes or when you're doing things on your own, to say, could I use this as an example when I'm interviewing for a co-op job or down the line for a full-time job. The other important thing I think is that if this printer is not done, it's not like you're completely satisfied with it, and he's still able to talk about it. So just because you're not done with something, or you're not at that final stage, or you're still not sure what that final stage is going to look like, it doesn't matter. You can still put it into your portfolio or make it a sample of work to bring with you for an interview. Okay? So I'm going to have Martin come down and then bring Louise up, and we're going to do a question and answer for both of them together. after.
Can I make one,
Yes.
few observations? So just a few things off of Martin's portfolio that it's important to note. Pictures, 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 and pictures. There were a lot of pictures, and they were good, and they showed kind of progression throughout. I went to Smithwise, Boston Device Development, and I said, what are you looking for in a portfolio? And they basically said, pictures with supporting text. Like I look at the pictures, and then if I need to look at the text, I'll look at the text. So don't make your portfolio text-centered. Try to make it picture-centered as possible. I like it was a combination of things, so actual pictures, renderings, just some quick prototypes you had done down to the finished product. We understand that you may not have those, but anytime you can put in that combination, that's awesome. And then I believe every picture was labeled. So often people will just throw up some pictures, and if you're putting together a portfolio, it doesn't really make sense. And without those, you'd be probably looking at a smattering of images saying, oh, okay, so I think I can sense the progression here, but you had everything labeled, so make sure labels are included in whatever you do. Okay, sorry. Take it away.
No worries. Hi everyone, my name is Louise. I'm a 5th year mechanical engineering student. If you're reading any of this, this is me a year ago. I haven't updated it yet, so it says 4th year. But and last fall I studied abroad in London, so I wanted to create a portfolio so that when I was interviewing over Skype, and it was very grainy, they had something that was more tangible and they could see my personality in a different way than in person. So I chose Portfolio Box for my portfolio. Really easy to use, really configurable. You can just drag pictures, write any text you want. Very simple. If you're a computer engineer, it might be nice to create your own website so that you can showcase your web design skills as your portfolio. So that's a cool thing. And so this is my homepage. It's my About Me. When you type in my link, this is what comes up. So it's basically what I'm currently doing. I'm studying abroad, and it's saying a little bit about me, the classes I'm taking, and it says my past co-ops and what I want for my next co-op. So it's really a cover letter, trying to set myself up for my next co-op, for my interviews that I'm looking for. So the top part is really my cover letter, and the bottom is a little bit more about me, just fun personality stuff. This is me and my brother. We ran a half marathon together. So just showing that I don't just do engineering stuff all day. So showing a little fun side. And then also, and for my portfolio, my link is on my resume, and I'll show you my contact page. So this is a way that any employer can contact me. They can put their name, email. This was included with the Portfolio Box, which was so nice. So there's my email, my Skype, and then let's see if it works. Yes, a download of my resume right on my portfolio. And then at the top, you can see that there's my email and my portfolio link. So it's all very easy. I make it very easy to hire me, which is the point of a portfolio. So this is so that's about me and the contact. This is like my projects page. And so I put previous projects I worked on co-op. I'm also on the Northeastern Baja team, so I put my work that I do with them in here, and then also what I do for fun. So I don't have my first co-op on here because I didn't do as much design work. It's listed on my resume, but it wouldn't give any help to my portfolio. But so this is my second one. I was at the MIT Lincoln Labs, and this is a badge in, badge out kind of company, as Nate said previously. Some places don't let you use your phones, take pictures. So the pictures that I have up are actually, one is from SolidWorks that I designed, the top cantilever beam, and the bottom is from a research paper that I did background for one of my projects. I have a separate, not with me, separate like documents of the work that I did. A lot of it was using the Instron. I did 3D printing, And I have those that I can bring into interviews. But for the internet, as Martin had said, if you search my name, these will come up, but nothing confidential is on the internet. And I had to talk to my employers to make sure what I could put up. And I think the best way to do it is, especially in the last few weeks of your co-op, is sit down with your employer and show them your updated resume, show them the work that you want to take out of it, and have them approve it, and and it's a good way to remember everything you did on co-op, because we do a lot. So I did 2 design projects at the Lincoln Labs, one on vibration analysis on the top and lattice design. So I put just a short summary of the work I did, the programs and whatnot. And a lot of this are just lines on my resume. So here this gives a more dynamic overview of what I did and the design process. On my resume, it's just like a single line, like designed in SolidWorks. But this shows the design process, like why I chose this type of material and how I went through validating my design. And then below, I use a lot of 3D printing software, and we tested the designs on an Instron machine. And so just showing the process and how you got to a final result. So those were my projects. And then, so even in the projects, I have like header pages for the things I've done. So Baja, I've done a lot of design work. So I put like an overall page. If you've never heard of Baja, this is a team picture and tells a little bit about what Northeastern Baja does and my part on the team. Just a general overview. And then you can go further into each of my designs. Oh, no. Oh, well, let's choose another one. No. No. Hmm? Yeah, oh, perfect. Okay, good. So this is one of the projects I've done. To analyze the frame of the car, the frame and the suspension, we put sensors on each link and then record it with a data acquisition system. So at the top, it was actually a capstone project done maybe 3 years ago. And when I joined the team as a sophomore, they said, okay, can you try and improve it? Well, yeah, give me a few months and I'll try and figure it out. So this is on the upper right is the original design that the capstone team came up with. And then this is just explaining how I understood the project and where I was coming in to it, and then going through how I designed a new system. I should change that. This picture is not very informative, but this is me working on circuits, which is for a mechanical engineer. It shows that I can also do other disciplines in engineering, which is good to show everything. I've also created this circuit board, which I soldered by myself. So I wanted to show all the detail that I put into it below. And then the paragraph next to it tells what I've done up to that point, and then I say what I'm going to do next. And let's see. And so another one I've done is steering angle. So again, it's a similar setup. I say the problem, I say what I've done to solve it, and then I show a result. And it's really important to say if you haven't finished something, that's completely okay. Just say what you want to improve and what you would do next. Because you're applying for engineering jobs, they just want to see the thought process and that you have the thought process. So even if it's not finished, we're only at co-ops for 6 months. Sometimes a project doesn't finish, but being able to understand and reflect on a project that you've done is really, really important. And employers would love it. So this is the last date of my project that I've done. It's currently just a proof of concept, and as you turn the steering column, the potentiometer that's attached to the tape turns, and then you can read a separate voltage and understand where the handlebars are in comparison. And we're planning on using it in conjunction with the other sensors. So yeah, I say that this is the state of it and what I'm going to do next. Let's see. Oh, also, for fun, this is Peggy. She's my old moped. I bought her when she wasn't working, and as a side project, I wanted to understand how it was built and rebuild her so that she's working. So I explained the background of her, how I got her. I know I say her, but bear with me. And so the main issue was that the carburetor was leaking, and I found out that this specific one loves to leak. There's so many forums saying how much it loves to leak. So I took the entire thing apart, looked at schematics for how to rebuild it, and understood what went wrong. And so I just took pictures along the way. Even though sometimes it's a pain to get pictures, even if it's very intuitive to just keep doing, you must take pictures and record what you're doing along the way. Actually, a side comment, at my last co-op, I was given a design notebook, and every day I would take notes on my tasks, what I learned, and just keep all my designs in that book. So now I have a hard copy of everything I've learned, especially for companies that don't want you taking pictures or taking certain things with you. Like a book copy of it is really nice to have. Yeah, so I rebuilt the carburetor and then fixed all the controls and wiring because they're really rusty and old. So I just showed pictures. And yeah, I'd say, yeah, that's about it.
All right, so a couple of questions for you. So you developed your own job, you found a job on your own for your third co-op while you were studying internationally.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you used your portfolio to help you with that process?
So actually how I found co-op is I did a lot of research online because I wanted to do a product development co-op, and a lot of there aren't many that Northeastern has, so I wanted to try and contact everyone I possibly could. So I called maybe 20 companies, cold called 20 companies, and I sent them a link to my portfolio and my resume attached in an email. And a lot of them, when I got a Skype interview, they had already looked at my portfolio. So, yeah.
And these are all in California.
Yes. The time difference was fun calling.
And both of you have your portfolios on websites with your names. How did you go about getting those?
So with Portfolio Box, it was a bundled price. I think I really should take it down. It's like $7 a month. There are definitely cheaper options, but this gave me a domain and the ease of putting a portfolio together. Like this, like each of these blocks are, you just drag and drop and type. It's so simple and intuitive. It's really nice. But other websites, you need a domain name and hosting. So hosting is like all your photos and information has to be stored somewhere. So you pay for that space. And then a domain is your username. So some like WordPress, you can have a domain, but it'll say louisekatzovitz.wordpress.com, but that's free. If that's not, I don't think employers will dock you for having WordPress in your URL. But yeah, so this gave me the option. Just there's a huge list of portfolio website options. Just go through them and see how much time you want to put in, time and effort you want to put into the logistics, or some just will do it for you.
So we had asked Louise to present because of a few things. First off, I really liked that she had a custom URL. Two, that she had used it abroad. And then if you look at her portfolio, under projects, there are 2 samples from her co-op. And I think people get bent up and hung up on the fact that work samples or portfolios need to be everything from while you're on co-op. And you are an excellent example. You put in Baja, you put in Peggy, and it still shows you as a great engineer, and it's just as fun. And then the other thing is, her personality really does come through. So in writing your professional summary, if you put together a portfolio, it is nice to have a little summary there. In writing your descriptions, as long as you're kind of successfully walking that personal professional line, you can let your personality shine through a little bit. And so they're trying to get more of a picture of who you are before they even bring you into interview. So she has some really good text on there as well. Although not all your images are captions. So,
I do have some revisions.
yeah.
No one's
So we're gonna show a quick work sample, and then we're gonna open up for questions.
Okay.
All right, so,
So Eric was kind enough to let us use a work sample.
Here we go. All right, so Eric, how did you use these? Were these?
There's a link on my resume to a hosted version of this PDF, and then I would print it out and bring it to interviews and like kind of give you a talking point, just throw it in front of them, they can ask you about it.
Okay, good. So these are 3 excellent examples of just what samples of work could look like. So all you did was you put 3 pictures from that particular project and then a quick description of what that project was. What I really do like about this one is that it's my concept. You talk about your contribution, your part. A lot of times when we look at samples of work, when we look at projects, especially if it comes from academics, it's all about the group did this, the group did that. That's awesome, but it's really always not showcasing what you did as an engineer. So make sure that you do put that in. So here's one in particular.
And on the resume, we don't let you say I or my or we. So this is your chance to say the I and the my. Really show what you did.
So just another quick one again, only
These
2
are
pictures.
great pictures.
And a short description, and then a final 3rd one. And how did they work for you during interviews?
It was actually really useful. Kind of ended up working at was looking into engineering experience, injection molding, and machining. Those 2 work samples and pretty good lining. But I think in general, it's just useful to like have a range of things to show them.
So yeah, so this probably didn't take too much time to put it together. And so this is what I was saying, you can do a portfolio, and they have really good portfolios that they showcase, but you can also put something like this together and it will be just as good. Now, if you are applying to Apple or some of our high-level product development jobs, you're most likely going to need a portfolio. Quite frankly, we won't send your resume without a portfolio link to it. But if you're looking at other jobs, samples of work are just fine. So these are quick 3 things, 2 from work and 1 from class. Is that what it came from? That you're able to pull it. Okay. All right. So
Come on.
what questions do you have for any of us? You can ask them about formatting, content. Come on up. Content, delivery, how they used it. You can ask us as well. Anything. What are you still curious about? Yes.
So during the interview, sometimes the employer likes to take the lead and just start asking you questions. So how do you incorporate your portfolio into what you're talking about? Make them get more curious about what you did instead of them just straight asking you questions.
So the question is about how to get an employer to look at your portfolio and be curious about what it is that you did, rather than them just drilling you with questions.
So I think part of it depends on the employer. When I was interviewing at Digital Lumens, I got in, and then the first thing we went to was the portfolio. They wanted to know what was in it, what did I do, why I did it, and how I did it. And the whole interview was spent just drilling through that. On the other hand, someone interviewing you might you know, you're more concerned with the academic side of things or your other professional experience. So I think it's, one thing I tried to do is to bring up like the STAR method is you relate what they're asking about to something that you did. So although it might not be exactly related, like they might be designing parts for, machine parts for something else out of steel, designing 3D printed parts as desk tchotchkes. The important thing is to show is that like you understand what the limitations of each thing are and relate one to the other. Like if you learned one, you can learn the other.
So you would say during, like, if you look at my portfolio, I did something very similar, so you would actually kind of put it in front of them as.
Yeah, you turn them towards that as like, it would be a learning process that, you know, I didn't know anything about 3D printing when I started, but I learned this, this, and this, and now I'm successful at it. I can do the same thing for machine components if that's the example.
And even I remember in my interview, when they would ask a question, I would refer to my portfolio. I'd say, and on this page of my portfolio, you can see that I've done this, and I would watch and like look at my portfolio and like be brought to it, and then actually that helped them ask more questions from my portfolio because they saw that one thing. So yeah, you can be very forceful in an interview and kind of just direct it however you want.
And I think that's one of the advantages of a portfolio is it kind of puts you in the driver's seat of the interview to be able to say, here's all these cool things, and now they may abandon all those other questions that they had planned for you, and you're running the interview. So it can really kind of put you in the power seat. It also helps you to be more prepared for the interview because hopefully you've looked at your resume and your portfolio before the interview, so there's no surprises in there. And then you're able to kind of say, you know, here's really what I know because you've prepared using it. Other questions? Don't be scared.
So for my co-op, I didn't do a lot of design. What advice would you give for me when making a sample work and portfolio?
So the question was that if on your co-op you don't do a lot of design, what else could you do with your portfolio?
Were you able to do testing?
Yeah.
Take pictures of test equipment, or just even describe if you can't take pictures. I did a lot of testing on my second co-op at the Lincoln Labs, and so my other portfolio has pictures of Instrad machines, just pictures of things being broken. You don't necessarily have to design, but having the ability to analyze and see like what went wrong and to help improve design is almost as important as designing itself.
I just want to add that with your portfolio, you don't want it to be just designs, right? You want it to show, remember that 360 view of you? So, you know, as a co-op, hopefully you're doing more than one thing over your 3 co-ops, so you're able to show your different skills. And the same thing in classes. You're doing, you know, maybe eventually you're going to do FEA if you haven't done already. Maybe you're going to use ANSYS. You might be doing some documentation and presentations in labs that are beneficial. When you go to graduate, you're going to be doing capstone. That's a huge project that can go into your portfolio eventually. So it's much greater than design. And I think Peggy is a really good example. You didn't design Peggy, right? So you pulled Peggy apart, you looked at Peggy, you fixed Peggy, whoever your Peggy is, that's a really good example of something that's not design related that really shows that you're an engineer. So think outside, past the design.
Yeah. And just one kind of side note, going off of not being able to have pictures or more describing it, I had someone who worked at it was UTC or one of those Sikorsky and was not able to take much of anything. Instead, he scoured the internet and like pulled different images of displays that he had worked on but were used for marketing materials and put that in his portfolio just as the visual, and then said what he was working on heat shields, and he was saying it was behind this display, just so there was something eye-catching there to draw the reader in and then relate. So when you're saying I worked on this display, they can say, oh, this is a display and working behind it. So that is another workaround that you can do.
And also, if you're not able to take something from work, you still have the skill. So bring the skill to the computer lab and make something on your own. So if you weren't able to take something that you designed, go to the computer lab, get on SolidWorks, design something else for fun. Or again, if you learned how to use ANSYS but you weren't able to take that with you, go to the computer lab, use ANSYS, put something together, and then use that as your sample of work. So you kind of push yourself a little bit.
Probably a push.
Yeah, about how many samples or projects would you consider portfolio more viable over sample work? Yes.
I'd say when you start getting over maybe four different samples is a nice tipping point for going into a portfolio, because then you're just getting a lot of different images that you're sending to someone. The other option is that if you have a bunch of different samples and you don't have a portfolio, you don't have to send every single one. Kind of like you may be tailoring your resume, or you should be tailoring your resume for a position that you really, really want. You could also tailor what you're sending to someone. But yeah, I think that would be a tipping point. Do you guys agree, disagree? I'm just pulling that number based on experience and what I've seen. Yeah?
But I think it's less about the number and more about the quality.
Yeah.
So, what are you trying to show, and is it being shown successfully through the work sample versus if you put a little bit more of that effort into make it a portfolio sample? So kind of think about what are you applying for, what are the skills they're looking for, and am I able to demonstrate it successfully in this format? That's how I would look at it, less quantifiable.
So are we basically going to choose, all right, I'm going to do a portfolio, or okay, I'm going to do a work sample, or should we have both?
Depends where you are in the process, I would say.
So I forgot, I'm supposed to be repeating
yeah.
questions. So that last question was, do you have to choose between making a portfolio or putting together work samples?
Generally I think you could do one or the other. If you put together a portfolio, I know you guys had some kind of supplemental materials that went into your portfolio because of confidentiality, but I would almost think if you're taking the time to put together a full portfolio and it's nicely done, easy to navigate, then that would be what you send out to an employer. And then if you don't want to do the full portfolio, you would choose just samples of work. So I would choose one or the other.
On the other hand, we had some feedback from employers that wanted to see them come into the interview with something to pass out in the interview. So I think if you have an online portfolio, like you said before, it might be difficult to say you're going to print it. You may need to have some samples. I think several of our employers have said having that on the interview is still good, depending on whether they're the type that are going to look at your portfolio.
So say if I had like a PowerPoint presentation as my portfolio, I could just print that out in the interview.
And it might be one of those where you don't staple it together, that way you can pull it apart and pass it around.
Paper clips, I guess.
Paper clip it in some way, but
So I'm not an engineer, but I've made a portfolio. It's, I think, part of how I got this job and my job before. And it's a binder where I have my samples of work based on kind of the qualifications of the job, and I pull out the samples based on what the interviewer is asking me. So I think how you build it is your decision. The most important part is it demonstrating what you want it to demonstrate? If it's not, then it's not going to be effective, and it's been a waste of your time, and we don't want that. So really thinking about what am I trying to demonstrate, and how can I do it in an effective way? So I think one of the best ways to try that out is to build it, go meet with your coordinator, and show it to them and explain what you did. If you're able to do that, then you've done it well. If you aren't, then that shows you got to go back and do some revisions.
And we'll have career fairs again this year. So, we're looking through resumes, we're looking through a lot of things, and if you're coming with a portfolio and you just want a set of eyes on it, we may refer you to one of the career peers to look through and say, can you kind of give some feedback and help through that process? So either we will do it or a career peer will do it.
So I know we've reached our time. Is there any last questions before we wrap it up? So I really want to ask you to thank Martin and Louise for coming and volunteering to share their experience with us. I think we're going to be sending this out, so if you wanted to watch it again, or folks that weren't able to be here can watch it. along with potentially a short survey, just seeing if there's other topic areas that you're interested in having one of these small little information type of seminars about. We can't promise we're going to get it done this summer because it's a little bit crazy, but for future programs and things like that too. So thank you all for coming, and have a lovely day.